Recent surveys in the US, Canada, France, and the UK show the public believes a world war is likely within the next 5 years. That fear spiked on October 28th, when the US and Israel launched major airstrikes deep inside Iran. These attacks hit military infrastructure and resulted in the death of senior figures, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Within days, a localized dispute expanded into a massive regional crisis. More than 20 different countries across the Middle East, Europe, and the Caucasus are now caught up in varying levels of military action. With dozens of militaries now active in the same theater, the core question is whether we are witnessing the initial stages of a third world war. Historians often point to the summer of 1914 to understand how a small regional dispute can spiral out of control. Back then, a single assassination in the Balkans pulled an entire continent into a devastating conflict. This map shows Europe's complex borders in 1914, defined by a dense network of overlapping defense treaties. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, that treaty network engaged automatically. Russia stepped in, Germany joined, France sided with Russia, and Britain entered the fight. That mechanical chain reaction ultimately destroyed empires. Today, a similar web of overlapping defense pacts and security guarantees exists in the Middle East, threatening to pull neutral nations into the current conflict. The recent strikes immediately radiated outward. 6 nations in the Gulf Cooperation Council, a political and economic alliance of Middle Eastern countries, along with Jordan, Iraq, and Turkey, have quickly become targets of missiles and drones, pulling them directly into the crossfire. To the north, fighting in Lebanon has intensified sharply. Hezbollah, a prominent Lebanese armed group, has launched hundreds of rockets into Israel, forcing interceptor missiles to work at maximum capacity. Israel has responded with heavy bombing across southern Lebanon, causing nearly 1 million people to flee their homes in just over a week. The ripple effects have reached Europe. 7 European nations, including Britain, France, and Germany, have dispatched warships to the eastern Mediterranean near Cyprus to monitor the situation and bolster regional defenses. The attempt to keep this fight contained has failed. The battlefield now spans from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. What has intelligence agencies most concerned is that this expanding Middle Eastern web is now linking up with an entirely separate war. Reports indicate that Russia is actively supplying intelligence to Iran. This data is being used to help locate and target U.S. military bases and assets across the Middle East. The two conflicts are also sharing weapons. The Shahed drone, manufactured by Iran, is now the primary tool of destruction being flown into targets in both Ukraine and the Middle East. In response, Ukraine is sharing its hard-earned tactical knowledge with the U.S. and Gulf states, teaching them how to track and shoot down these specific drones based on years of daily combat experience. This massive overlap has led to direct warnings from leadership. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, a massive military alliance between North American and European countries, has cautioned that nations need to prepare for the kind of large-scale warfare that defined the 20th century. Because the fighting in Europe and the Middle East are now actively sharing intelligence and weaponry, the odds of these separate fires merging into a single global crisis have increased significantly. With alliances activating and battlefields connecting, we have to ask, what is actively preventing the outbreak of World War III? Fortunately, the modern world has 3 powerful safety mechanisms in place. The first is nuclear deterrence. Superpowers understand that any direct head-to-head combat between nations with nuclear arsenals carries the absolute certainty of mutual destruction. The second is the use of proxy wars. Instead of fighting directly, major powers fund and supply smaller armed groups to fight on their behalf. This keeps the violence somewhat contained and gives the larger nations room to deny their involvement. The third, and perhaps most effective mechanism, is financial. World leaders have watched the major conflicts of the last 2 decades and learned that modern warfare drains national treasuries while rarely achieving the original military goals. The United States spent trillions of dollars and years of effort in Iraq and Afghanistan. Russia is currently burning through its resources in Ukraine. In all of these cases, the aggressors accumulated massive financial burdens without securing a victory. The sheer cost and ultimate futility of these modern occupations act as the strongest barrier against turning this regional web into a global war. Because the costs of a full-scale conflict are so high, international attention is increasingly focused on finding a diplomatic exit, primarily through direct talks between the US and Iran. However, both sides are locked in opposing strategies. Iran demands a complete halt to all military strikes and firm, long-term security guarantees before they will engage in any meaningful talks. The United States operates on a different logic. They believe that applying constant, heavy military pressure is the only reliable way to force an adversary to negotiate in the first place. Adding to the friction are Iran's demands for war reparations to rebuild its infrastructure, while other nations are busy drawing up new strategic partnerships, like Israel expanding its security ties with India. We are caught in a deeply tangled web, but history's painful lessons are currently keeping the worst-case scenario at bay. The real danger is that rigid demands for peace might accidentally trap the world in an endless cycle of escalation.